Yes, Caitlin. Right, good afternoon and welcome to the 2016 CCOVI Lecture Series. I'm CCOVI xenologist Belinda Kemp and I'm pleased to introduce our speakers today. We've got double trouble. We've got Maxim Voronov and Wesley Helms, and they'll both be speaking today. Maxim is a CCOVI Fellow and Professor of Marketing, International Business and Strategy at Goodman School of Business. He received his PhD from Columbia University. He's completed research on the Ontario wine industry's adoption of global winemaking standards, as well as factors that increase the presence of Ontario wines in restaurants. Recently, Maxim has started research on Canadian whiskey and believes that there are important synergies between Canadian wine and spirits industries. Wesley is an Associate Professor of Marketing, International Business and Strategy at Goodman School of Business and a graduate of York University. Today they will be presenting their talk called Evangelizing for Ontario Wine, When and How Passion Matters. I'd like to hand over to the boys here.
Thank you, Belinda. Just before we start, this has really been a fascinating process for us. It's been about a 3-year investment of time to sort of look at this industry. We've found it to be absolutely enthralling to study. So with that stated, we want to sort of just quickly take a step back as to why we're here and why we're here speaking to you. First, what's the point to education and research forums such as this? The goal of these things is, from our perspective, is at least to view something in a new way. So what do we mean by that? Sadly, we have a bunch of marketing people here who probably know this. But this is a familiar image. We've seen this image a lot, right? Question I have is do you see the arrow? It's okay if you don't see the arrow.
I think some people nodded.
Between the E and the X.
I'm going to break rules here. The goal today is just basically to introduce you to some things that we didn't see before and now that we see, and hopefully to share that. Specifically, we want to sort of view this notion of passion. We talk about passion a lot in the wine industry, and an increasingly popular word called evangelism, and perhaps gain some insight so that we see these concepts in new manners. So with that, I'll just turn over to Maxim.
Thank you, Wes. Okay, let me switch over to my slides. This is some research that we've done with our colleagues. Felipe Massa at Loyola University in New Orleans and Liang Wang at University of San Francisco. So let me start with this. And this is the slides are a little faded here in the room. What would you say this to? Since Wes started with the visual, I figure I'll try again as well. What do these two images have in common with each other? Kind of a trick question. Do we see any commonalities? Is there anything, any link that we would make between what we're seeing outside an Apple store, the lineup, and vineyard in Ontario? Well, it was kind of meant to be a trick question, and basically, it was meant to be framed in a way that's either silly or just difficult to answer, whichever way you want to side with it. The thing that's in common, right, is the success, whether it's a consumer electronics product such as iPhone or whatever, or the success of a wine region, has a lot to do with not whether or not something is understood well by people what it is and what it isn't, but with the groundswell of popular support and grassroots support and passionate identification with it, right? So, which is why when Apple releases a new iPhone, there's a huge lineup outside. And increasingly, what we have seen over the years, Ontario wine has become more accepted, more popular here at home and internationally. And it's not because people necessarily, and this is not to say that understanding is unimportant, but what we argue is the key thing is that there's been increase in grassroots support and kind of passionate care and identification by people on the ground, not just by wineries themselves, not just by the agencies that are working specifically to advocate on behalf of the industry, and not just the government, but also in many respects, equally importantly, by the various people who use whatever positions they have to advocate and promote the region. So the notion that we think it kind of explains what's happening here, and this is we're drawing on a paper that recently was accepted at the Academy of Management Journal, is this idea of institutional evangelism. Basically, audiences can become emotionally committed to and advocate for new ideas, organizational forms, disruptive practices, and the interests of others, and that motivates them to act on behalf of spreading these practices or spreading this organization's way of doing things. Again, this is, I wonder if we can somehow dim the lights a little bit or something.
You can dim them a little bit, the video sound, the view, it can be harder to see you.
Okay. It's okay, I'll take that chance, I suppose. Thanks. So some examples of where researchers have looked at this is the supporters of Ferran Adrià, a famous Spanish chef, kind of rising to fame and prominence as one of the world's greatest chefs because of the key audiences who have sort of supported him and spread the word, evangelize on his behalf. Same goes for advocates for Frank Lloyd Wright's controversial Unity Temple, whereby, again, a lot of this kind of distributed support from important audiences where people kind of advocated on behalf of his and spread the word and made it accepted and consecrated as a masterpiece. So how does this apply to what we're talking here about with respect to Ontario wine industry? So here what we're seeing on the left side, right? So obviously we're seeing the increase in sales of VQA wine over the years, because obviously we're seeing dramatic rise. I'm also seeing the number of VQA wineries emerging, what's harder to see here on the right side. Actually, is the pattern increase of various efforts that we would argue to promote the kind of from important audience members to promote and support Ontario wine, which kind of corresponds to that. So, for example, we're talking about the importance, the emergence and growth of educational organizations such as Ontario Wine Society and wine clubs such as Yellow Wine Club and many other organizations that have emerged over the years. What we're talking about here is the increased number of restaurants adopting VQA only or mostly VQA wine lists. What we're talking here about wine media and the increased emergence of bloggers who increasingly take the time and energy to advocate and promote and educate the public about Ontario wine, right? So we think all of these things are key to the increased acceptance and appreciation for Ontario wine that we're seeing here. Now, the question. So what we do know, and again, this is not necessarily unique to Ontario wine. This is something we see in a variety of industries. Is that evangelism matters, right? People taking whatever positions they have to advocate on behalf of an organization or a practice or way of doing things that they believe is valuable and important. The question then is, and that's what drove this particular research, is so how is evangelism engendered? So how is it that we can get people, audience members who normally would either write just dispassionate, objective review about wine and just leave it at that, or just ignore wine and just not write a review about it? How can we take people who would just, if they're a restaurateur, just give people whatever wine is popular at the moment from whatever region happens to be popular? How can we take people who are, who can have, a wine club where people just, taste whatever wines are fashionable at the moment. How can we take those kind of people and get them out of their role as just audience members, as spectators, where they just observe but don't interfere, to passionately care enough about practice such as Ontario winemaking to really go way above and beyond simply, occasionally supporting, occasionally buying a bottle of wine, to really advocate for it. So where does this come from? So that was the purpose of this particular research. So, this is just as well that this slide is not visible anyway because it's kind of boring. This is, so the nitty-gritty detail of how we collected and analyzed the data. But it has taken years, and it was a qualitative study. We basically talked to a variety of not just wineries, but also the various key audience members to try to understand those of them who have become evangelists. How is it that they became evangelists? Where did that passionate identification come from? And we also try to understand how is it that some audience members did not connect, did not have the same sort of experience, interaction with wineries, but did not develop the same level of passionate identification that would want them to evangelize on behalf of the industry, right? So, and again, this is another one that you really can't see, but this is basically how, we amassed this huge data and how we sort of coded it and aggregated it and came up with the categories that we did. So, no need to spend time on that. So what I do want to talk about is what we found is that there's different kinds of rituals, really. And there's different components to these rituals. So rituals are kind of these ongoing interactions between, wineries and audience members, as well as, between some of these people who already are evangelists and already are busy trying to promote and advocate for Ontario wine, and people who are not yet evangelists. So, and we found there's three. So, emotional identification was certainly key, but specifically we found three sort of templates, if you will, of these different scripts that they use, that the wineries used and the evangelists used to try to kind of convert people from spectators to evangelists. So the first one is Provenance, which sort of details the chronology of ownership and custody or the story of a particular wine, right? So this is an example of a quote from a winery's website, and I'm sure some of you can very easily figure out which one that is. Our ancestors managed this land for 200 years before we acquired it from our cousins, and more than a quarter century ago, we are continuing the tradition of stewardship, right? So this kind of this resonates with audiences emotionally because it prompts them to think of admiration, respect, and kind of reverence for these people who are continuing this tradition and kind of stewardship of the grapes and the winemaking tradition. Hedonic ritual describes pleasure, sensory arousal, and asserts playfulness. So this is something that we actually see, John Saab was one of his columns. These are more or less randomly picked out, just to illustrate what we mean by this. The flavor intensity is a little greater than the regular dry Riesling, which just at 8% alcohol. This is a delight. This is a delight for sipping or with raw oysters. And I'll give more examples in the following slides. That go beyond just the words. And glory rituals describe occasions when praise or status is accorded by external audiences or gained through effort. So the references to competition, to status, to prestige, to scarcity. This is elite product, etc. Right? So this is examples again. This is picked out from public domain. How some of these rituals seem to be playing out in such things as wine labels. So, for example, we're seeing Provenance play out in Chateau de Charmes label, where there's kind of reference to this kind of the French tradition, the French winemaking tradition, which sort of, the moment you see this image, you kind of see what is the legacy that they're trying to communicate and where the tradition comes from, right? Or hedonic rituals apparent in this label from Small Talk Winery, or glory ritual, which is apparent in the in this label from Vineland Estates, where kind of sort of gets, even the word elevation kind of gets you think of status and eliteness and sophistication and so on, right? So some events, events are also very important ways that these rituals are communicated, perhaps the most important way, more so than words, because they provide more visceral sort of experiences for audiences member that can kind of transcend their sort of cognitive defenses and to get them to connect more emotionally. So for example, glory rituals, various of words and gala, provenance, basically like celebration of grape growers' legacy, or any other sort of kind of celebrating the region's heritage, hedonic rituals, so such as the ice wine festival, and where the focus is on pleasure and enjoyment and just kind of making things fun. And of course, wine boutique visits are themselves perhaps the most important rituals of them all, right? So, and we've noticed that with respect to wine boutique experiences, wineries may use any one or combination of these rituals as well, right? So some wineries will emphasize the hedonic ritual by kind of just making it a fun place to hang out and to taste wine and to have some food paired with that to enjoy it. Some wineries will really take painstaking care to educate the visitors about their winemaking practices and the tradition that they follow, which would be consistent with the Provenance ritual template. And also some wineries will emphasize their words and the distinctions that they have garnered, their reviews, the Wine Spectator write-ups and so on and so forth, which is consistent with the glory rituals. Right? So how does all this come together? Well, what it comes together is essentially, the starting point there are these institutional templates that are not necessarily just original to Ontario, right? These are basically, we can find these things in pretty much any wine region. So these three types of rituals, glory, provenance, and hedonic, those are more or less universals, right? So what we're finding here in the context of Ontario are simply Ontario-specific manifestations of how wineries communicate with audiences and how they try to kind of engender this care that motivates audience members to become evangelists on behalf of the region. So these templates that manifest in these rituals, then there's some examples I just gave you, right? What's also very important, though, is that audience members enter these interactions as rituals not as blank slates, right? We all have a bunch of identities, right? So some of us have salient foodie identities, some of us have salient professional identities, some of us have salient regional identifications. And so those salient identities they interact with the rituals, right? So we found, for example, that people who sort of think of themselves more or less as consumers are a lot less receptive to any of these rituals, period, full stop. So they generally, they just think, oh, this is just marketing. This is just marketing effort from wineries. It doesn't really resonate with me one way or another. All I really care about is what value for money is this particular wine offering, and I'll buy it. If I like it, I won't, and then I'll move on. Also professional, people think of themselves in a particular interaction as a professional first. So for example, if I'm thinking of myself, I'm a professional, dispassionate wine critic, and my job is to evaluate wine objectively. Again, these rituals are less likely to resonate with them because they have this very strong defense against it. But if my identity as a foodie or as a Ontarian and kind of patriot, if those identities are important and salient to me, then those rituals are more likely to resonate, right? So when there is a resonance, what we mean is that there is a kind of inspiring emotional experience. I'm transformed from being a sort of dispassionate observer to somebody who deeply and profoundly cares about Ontario winemaking. Not necessarily just about a specific winery, by the way, that we find. So oftentimes, so this care generally and this passion is not just for the specific winery. So it's different somewhat than simply, sort of, becoming sort of a brand evangelist or becoming developing brand loyalty to a specific winery. Generally speaking, these evangelists came to care. They may have entered the industry through an experience with a specific winery, but they tended to develop a passionate identification to the industry as a whole. So, and then that leads to evangelistic behavior, whereby people then reenact these rituals and they try to convert others. They how do you say it? Proselytize. Thank you. That word. Can't do that. He does. Anyway, do the kind of things that are meant to convert others. That are meant to convert this does create a virtuous cycle where people who have at some point been converted by winery or winery representative then want to evangelize on behalf of the wine industry, and they themselves want to create other evangelists as well. What else? And in fact, we even found that some of the more passionate evangelists that we found in our sample, their initial conversion did not happen necessarily purely through interaction with winery, but actually through other evangelists. So basically, kind of second-hand or third-hand, if you will, exposure to these rituals, right? But again, for people for whom professional identities or their consumer identities were salient, these conversions, generally speaking, did not happen. The other thing that we found that of those three rituals, the glory ritual was perhaps the least effective in creating evangelists, right? So people would, they would express appreciation and respect for a winery, but generally speaking, they would not necessarily come to care very deeply for the winery or for Ontario winemaking. So implications. So again, so I think we are emphasizing and we're not saying that that other things that have been done to promote and grow Ontario winemaking have not been important. That's not our intention at all. What we're saying is that there is an underappreciated element, which is sort of this kind of the grassroots support, which develops through this ongoing effort of kind of converting dispassionate, important audience members into evangelists who then continue converting others and so on and so forth. So these rituals are an important thing that kind of creates this conversion experiences for people, who go from being dispassionate to being passionate advocates. Key to this, of course, is that these rituals have to create authentic experiences between people, between wineries and audience members. So again, generally speaking, what happens with when those conversions do not happen is when the interaction is experienced more or less just sort of as a marketing interaction, and so people then put up their defenses and they do not react. So these things are not, these rituals, as important as they are, they do not equally work well for all audience members. So we find that that depends on how they see themselves and how they identify as a person. Whether again it's the wine, the foodie culture is more important to them, or whether they see themselves as Ontarian and kind of feel their patriotic duty to care and support local. Those things are more likely to make them receptive, and identities that they're also identities that that neutralize these rituals to a large extent as well. So that's the evangelism bit, and I'm going to hand over to Wes, who will talk about the importance of passion and when and how that. Actually, I'm not sure if I should since we have two separate, I wonder if we should have taken questions about this part.
We're going to do that at the end.
Okay, good.
So my presentation is on a similar line, only I'm sort of focusing more within the organization, within the winery itself. So this is about placing work passion in context. How do wineries regulate passion for effective performance? Same authors as the prior one. So Steve Jobs, once again, let's go with the Apple, because Apple's also associated with passion. But people say you have to have a lot of passion for what you're doing, and it's totally true. And the reason is because it's so hard that if you don't, any rational person would give up. It's really hard, and you would have to do it over a sustained period of time. So if you don't love it, if you're not having fun doing it, you don't really love it, you're going to give up. Just so you know, Steve Jobs died before 2014, something I realized when I look at this. But this is just a quote talking about passion and work passion from USA Today. So I just want to open it up. I mean, does the passion for the winery's employees matter whether it achieves its work goals? Anybody have any thoughts on this from your time in the industry?
I worked in winery retail, and I would certainly agree with that. We were reviewing this morning some of the events over the weekend. It was a very busy weekend. There were some large groups that arrived, and I wasn't there myself, but I was overhearing stories being related, and it put those people who were there under considerable pressure. And I think the passion makes a difference between the ability on one hand to say, oh, well, you know, it's part of the job. We handle it pretty well. Let's see if we can do a little better next time maybe. Or on the other hand, going, I hate this job. Every weekend this happens. And I can't take it anymore. And I've seen that too.
Yeah. So we have one vote for passion matter. And persistence. Anybody think that passion doesn't matter?
I don't necessarily think that a lot of the passion is reflected in the compensation monetarily in production, at least.
That's a really excellent and interesting
If
point.
you look at incomes within the production scale here versus BC or versus other places in the world, I don't think it's really reflected.
You don't get paid for passion. Yeah, that's really interesting.
You can work in a factory and make better money easily.
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, if we got paid for passion, man, that'd be interesting. Guys, there's literature out here on whether or not it works. Literature basically says this: passion is positive for work goals. The literature also says that passion can be negative for work goals, that passion can become obsessive in nature. Ultimately, what this literature seems to be headed towards is that the impact of passion is positive or negative for performance depends upon whether it is directed at work which prepares actors, right? So passion needs to prepare, it needs to be directed, you need to develop what's called work passion. What am I talking about when I talk about passion? Well, passion is an emotional and persistent state of desire on the basis of cognitive effective appraisals, and work passion is when that state of desire results in consistent work intentions and desires. That just took the passion out of the definition of passion. Passion is about your love for work. It's about love being directed towards that work. So the question becomes is how do wineries harness the passions of their members or employees to achieve their work goals so that you feel like you're being compensated for it? This is a really interesting question from an organizational perspective. You know, how does passion for work become shared and directed towards organizational goals? How do you get people expressing their passion towards organizational objectives? What are the organizational origins of work passion? I'm sure you've been in certain environments where it's a place and people love what they do. They love the product. I'm sure you've worked in places where people don't. Why do certain organizations? Why can they inspire that? And finally, whether passion for work will and isn't always necessary to prepare organizations to achieve their goals. You know, at the end of the day, is passion necessary? I think that's a real question about whether or not passion is actually necessary. If your organization has all the resources and advantages in the world, why would it even need a workforce that's passionate about what they're doing? Great context. Ontario's a fine wine industry. Just so you know, there's already been studies about passion about the broader wine industry. My colleague, Maxim has already talked about just the incredible passion and persistence that the founders of this industry had to make it survive, to make it grow in the cold, cold winters of Ontario. It's highly entrepreneurial in nature, which is where a lot of literature on passions comes from. And fine wineries, quite frankly, are a broadly studied context. We know a lot about wineries and their performance, specifically regarding the benefits of location for wineries. So based upon this, the question is that we address in this paper is how do award-winning wineries shape their actors' passions for work? And just once again, here's the boring stuff. We worked with an amazing data set provided to us largely by your fantastic industry, who were very open with us and enabled us to come in, observe, interview, collect texts. And immediately upon evaluating these interviews, one thing was clear. People feel like there's a right passion for work. The problem with, so this from a quote, but the problem with that is nobody's passionate about it right. That's the problem, like nobody. If you're sort of just watering there, and especially when it comes to something you put inside your body, if you're just sort of wallowing in the middle and don't stand for anything, don't do anything, and blah, 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 you're not going to win. You need to, and like I said, you need to be something that defines every part of who you are. This is a very passionate statement about being passionate for the right things, the right types of work. At the same time, one of the things that was amazingly clear to us is that there's obviously a collective awareness of threat, an ongoing feeling of threat within this industry associated with the natural environment, working in our way, threat associated with emerging competition and what they could potentially do to the industry. Finally, the notion of threat associated with reputation. Ontario's wines have overcome a negative reputation for being table wine. It was also apparent that people were selecting and firing employees based upon their expression of passion for work. People were being let go and people were being hired based upon passion. Finally, people felt that you could train employees to be passionate for their work. I got trained by an actor immediately. I realized that I loved it, actually. I would never have chosen it, but by being in it, I realized I love this business. So the question is how do award-winning wineries shape their actors' passions for work? That's where we went to, and this is where we've arrived at. People come into wineries with diverse passions. They have passions for their families. They have passions for the product. They love wine. And they have passions for the place. They love this area. They love this context. However, fine wineries were different than those. Award-winning wineries were different than others because they had an ongoing sense of collective threat. There was always something there that was sort of honing, directing, that was threatening their ability to enjoy wine, to continue on their family legacy, to continue on living in the place that they loved. And in so doing, they drew from what we call survival institutions, which were collective beliefs regarding the nature of work in adverse contexts. And specifically, these survival institutions told them how they should direct their passion. And these impassioned particular forms or domains of work. What does this look like? Well, from one winery, which had actors that had a strong passion for their family and a strong passion for wine, they say, this is a real gem. It's just too bad that there isn't somebody in your family that would continue it. So I said this to Bub, and I said, don't give up. So you want this to continue in the family. And they had collective threats regarding this increasing competition that they faced around them. It's not an easy haul when people are coming around and spending all their money and buying up all the resources around you, especially if you have a passion for what you do. And they drew from collective beliefs in their environment regarding the notion of passion being a resource. Passion is something inherent. Your love for work is something inherent, and you have to hire the right people with that passion. And that impassioned technical work, which is love for the practice of producing and selling wine. The last one is an example of how they fired an individual because they were drunk on the job. They loved wine. They had a passion for wine a little bit too much. They did not hone that passion to the point that they were actually directing it towards work. If I worked in a winery, that's probably what I would do. There's also this notion of environmental threat and directing passion towards the experiments of creative work. In this winery, the winery actors had passion for family, wine, and places. They loved the Niagara region. And they had, this individual from this winery was, I want the best one. I want a great one. Tell me about his feature. What makes this one special versus that one? And constant threat of Mother Nature and what Mother Nature was going to throw at them next. And they drew from institutionalized beliefs regarding trial and error. This notion that you don't know what you're going to get, so therefore you have to be passionate about experimenting. This was constantly going through notions of founder narratives regarding he knew nothing about blank, and he failed miserably, lost all his money. So at the age of blank, he decided to give it one more try. You got to keep trying. You got to keep experimenting. And this led to passion for creative work. Which is a love for experimental learning and work. So we are still looking. We are still learning. It's nice just to have experiments like that. Finally, there's this ongoing concern regarding reputational threat. And we found that actors took this threat and directed it towards relational work. One actor said from one winery where there's diverse passions, I've got a huge passion for wine. I think, and they talk about reputational threats, specifically other wineries out there perhaps not living up to their standards. I think wineries could do better, way better. I think our standards here in Ontario are terrible. And everybody without exception starts on the cheap shit, right? That threat of having somebody tarnish their reputation. And he believed firmly that you could train your employees to harness their passion. That they have to harness their own passion and express it in their own way in order to ultimately share it with those around them. I want to over-deliver. I cannot. It goes back to sharing my passion, right? I can't share my passion with somebody if I charge $50 for a bottle of wine. That's him making the decision of sharing passion over charging more. So this is our model. And throughout this model, one thing bothered me to no end. And it was this notion that resources aren't enough. You can have all the resources in the world, it's not going to help you survive. They put emphasis on feeling the right or appropriate passions for work. So whenever these new players or existing people would come in with money, they'd say they have a dream of, they think it's the most romantic thing in the world to do, to have a vineyard. They don't have a clue about what's involved. And then you put up your $2 million building up there and you sit and wait for someone to come and buy your wine. And then you're still fighting for somebody for a place to sell your wine. And then you wonder why it isn't happening. And once again, nobody's passionate about it right. And these are largely directed at wineries with money. This is really confusing because don't resources prepare you to succeed in your environment? If you have more money, you can go out and buy the best land. You can buy the best equipment. You can go out and buy the best people. That's what the prior wine industry literature is all about, locational advantages. You buy the best property and you grow, located at the center of the industry. So in the Niagara Peninsula, you have greater access to economic, social, and relational capital, leading to better performance compared to people that are outside of the Niagara Peninsula and are growing outside of it. Wineries that face less adversity, just in general, should probably be more likely to achieve their goals. It's preparation, not passion. So what is the role of a winery's locational advantage on whether its work passions lead to goal achievement? That's the question. So what this means is, if you are located in Niagara and you have access to land, expertise, institutions with all sorts of knowledge, as well as staff, compared to those people on the outside of your industry, which are the more entrepreneurial nature, in the outside periphery of your industry. What does that mean? So what we did was we created a 7-year data set of wine contest performance. So how they do in wine contests. We controlled for other variables, and we coded for two things. Number one, we coded for whether they're located at the center of the industry or the periphery, outside of Niagara. And the other dimension of it was we coded for impassioned work. How we did this was we went all the way back in history and took a look at winemaker's philosophy provided by Tony Aspler, based upon his initial work. And when those weren't available, we did go to websites to take a look at their mission statements and philosophies in order to code for where did they express passion for work, towards which of our prior domains, creative, relational work, and finally, technical work. And so this is just what our coding looked like. And we came up with a couple graphs. First one that I'll point you to is an absence of impassioned work. So these were when we coded their content, and they basically said there was no implication of passion for work. There was no language of love for a specific area. A lot of this stuff was marketing language. We produce the finest wines. On the top, what you have is a red line. That red line represents those people with passion and without passion. And these are people located in Niagara. These individuals are located outside of Niagara. Once again, these ones do not have passion. These ones do have passion, and these ones don't have passion. My apologies. So what you see is that if you have passion, whether or not you have it or you don't have it, it doesn't impact your likelihood, which is on this side, of winning a wine award, of winning a wine contest. Passion doesn't matter if the expression of passion for work overall does not matter. If you are on the outside of the industry, you better express passion for work. If you don't, your likelihood of winning a wine contest goes way down. If you have a passion for the technical knowledge and practice of making wine, once again, it doesn't matter if you are in Niagara. If you are on the outside of Niagara, you better hope that you have passion for technical work. Technical work helps you win. The expression of passion for technical work matters.
Sorry, this is all relating back to winning awards?
Yes, winning wine contests, not financial performance.
Okay. And you're saying outside of Niagara?
Outside of Niagara.
So if you're considered counting your winery?
Exactly.
If you don't have if you're not passionate about your work, you have a less likelihood to win an award.
If you do not express passion for your work through your winemaking philosophy, if you don't direct that passion towards specific, it has what we're showing here at a very superficial level, initial level, is that it kind of has an initial interesting implications.
Okay,
I'm
you were talking there kind of interesting about one region versus the other. You would think it would be the same regardless, but.
Well, it's interesting, and we'll maybe get to some of that. The last one is interesting. So on this one you'll notice there's an upward trend. If you have impassioned work for relationships, if you express passion for relational work, your community, those people around you, engaging with your customers and your clients, it has significant implications for your likelihood of winning a wine contest. And finally, this is really interesting, is that if you have express passion for creative work, creating new wines, experimenting, once again, if you're on the periphery, it has really strong implications for winning wine awards. If you're at the center of your industry, if you express passion for creative work, it actually has a negative implication. So, one of the reasons why, we went back to the data to sort of find out specifically regarding that creativity part of it, which is, why would this notion of having being at the center of your industry have a negative effect for creative passion? Isn't wine all about creativity and being creative and creating new tastes? And so one wine actor responded this way to it. If you have people so passionate about wine, and there's people in Niagara so passionate about it, they make money somewhere else that they're not willing to make, that they're willing to almost make no money in the wine industry. You're doing it for the passion as opposed to the pay. They all seem to be never getting enough money in anything notionally artistic. There's a duality of business and artistry and a science. I love art so much I will act for almost nothing. You have musicians who will play for almost nothing because they love it. So if you're doing it and you have money, resources, and you're doing it for your love of new wines and things along those lines, and you have access to all sorts of resources, maybe it's negative. At the end of this exercise, this is kind of the model that we've come up with in completion, which is wineries, through collective threat and shared institutionalized knowledge about their industry, constrain the expression of work passion. Those organizations that have resources and don't feel threat, so they're just doing it. It's like, oh, I've got money to blow, and this is just a fun exercise. I don't really have threat. They don't harness perhaps they don't harness their actors' passion as well. It's unconstrained, and maybe they don't maybe they don't achieve their goals as easily. And this is very much determined by access to resources. At the end of the day, if you have access to resources, it tends to prepare you, and maybe passion isn't necessary for what you do. So, the contributions of this, about maybe what you can take away from this is, this interesting notion of the role of collective threat. We go around in our organizations and we're freaking out about all these threats. Well, maybe they're actually serving a purpose. Maybe they're focusing us on work that we need to be engaged in. The role of industry beliefs in impassioning the work of organizational actors. There's a lot of cultural knowledge. There's a lot of cultural capital out there about how to succeed in the industry. And this study sort of shows that knowledge, those institutionalized beliefs, actually inform and can enable people to win wine awards. The second study is the role of access to resources and work passion effectiveness. Our study strongly suggests that that if you have better access to resources, passion may not be necessary, and at times harmful. Creative work passion may become disruptive to the work of organizations with greater access to resources. The final slide, guys, is just one thing I think that you can take away from this. That era, as far as a new way of thinking about things. Really, both of our studies talk about relationship. If you are out there and creating relationship with your consumers, it has positive effects for both wineries, whether you have access or not. The reason why that probably is because you are sharing with them, that you're sharing and they are sharing with you about what they want, how tastes are changing, and you're gaining more input into what you do and how you do it effectively. So with that, thank you, and I guess open up for questions.
Any questions, anybody? Can I ask you something before you go? One of the things you mentioned just then was about access to resources, but it's also whether the wineries actively and actually participate in things as well, isn't it? When you're talking about success and about winning wines and that sort of thing, then it's not just locality to each other and to getting help and guidance from one another, but say sessions like ours, like the CCOVI Lecture Series, it's that choice to participate too. And that's not really a question, actually, that's a statement, isn't it? So, and also, there's much more with regards to the winery's ability to be able to participate as well. The assumption, on one hand, if a winery is making enough wine, and they're selling all their wine, and they're quite happy and they're doing a turnover, do they need to participate in all that? Do they want to? Do they want to grow any bigger themselves? Or so there's all those sort of assumptions to think about in there as well. Sorry, does anybody else want to ask any questions?
I actually just jump in for a second, and I think just the issue of resources, I think maybe slightly a bit unclear because the way we're sort of like. This is an exercise for us. We'll try to kind of translate from academic jargon into sort of more regular, accessible practitioner language, and which is always a challenge. But I think with resources in this particular case, what's meant is more like access to networks, like not necessarily resources in terms of financial resources, right? Because it's not. And when in terms of performance, and the awards is sort of taking that sort of a proxy really to measure, when we know it's not a perfect proxy, but the measurement of quality of wine performance, right? And we know again, we know it's fuzzy, right? But because it's a large enough sample, right? That statistically speaking, that takes care of all these sort of weirdnesses that whether or not what awards actually represent, right? And so the net and I think really the message, not to put words into your mouth, but I think is that wineries that are sort of at the center of the network. So Niagara, of course, would be at the center of network, as you pointed out, right? There's just so much. Wineries in Niagara are so embedded into the network. So there's so much of this tacit knowledge, information sharing, etc. That passion doesn't matter so much. Doesn't make nearly as much contribution to winning these awards, or it doesn't matter as much to producing the highest quality of wines as if you are outside somewhere in the periphery, where you don't have this easy access to the network and knowledge and information, and so you really kind of have to go above and beyond to really be passionate in order to really produce the level of quality.
So passion motivates you to overcome barriers.
That's right.
Overcome adversity. And it's, adversity is a strong term, but, hopping in that truck or hopping in that car to come here to gather knowledge is difficult.
Yeah.
But if you're in the Niagara region, you have a little bit more access to it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what all those sort of things.
Yeah, and just to add to that, there's a different concentration factor, but there's also the history and the length of the industries, because the people in the 70s had to have that same kind of passion as what's happening in the peripheral regions, because they're at a different stage in the game, right? So I guess that's where I was getting clarity on how that was all balanced with awards and so on, because I know, awards are challenging because they're tasted blind, they're all different criteria. Some wineries choose not to go into them and so on, right? So I just, that's something to look at, I guess.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. This model is not dynamic. It does not capture that history at all, because all this was created. This network, all this knowledge was created. When it comes to this, that's the reason why I thought it was fascinating, is these things are blinded. And what predicts whether or not people can, win them consistently is a fascinating question.
Any other questions from Ted?
I didn't want to ask the question, but when Maxim clarified about access to resources, because we know that in entrepreneurship literature, when you have passion, then you are more driven to search for new resource and tap into new resource, even though when it's not there. But when Maxim talk about network and access to information and become part of the insider, my question is, through your analysis, what would be your explanation for the situation when you already have a lot of access to resources, or already part of the network, already have information and knowledge? Why do you no longer need passion? And in fact, based on what you are describing now, looks like passion is actually negative.
Detrimental.
Yeah, it's actually detrimental when you already have the network. I'm wondering why.
The benefits of passion are exactly that. It motivates you to go out and solve problems. If you have all the resources in the world around you and you're trying to solve problems, could you be creating problems?
It could be, but passion also be linked to creativity. Yeah.
Or you're just simply creating, you're not winning awards because you're creating the new tastes that will eventually become the norm and the standard. That's my other sort of.
Right. Well, I think you've especially found the negative relationship with, I think, is between creative work, right?
Yeah.
So basically, which I think kind of speaks to this, right? So you have plenty of access to resources, and you're it becomes sort of creativity for the sake of creativity, right? Basically you're doing it because it's just you're sort of, you get divorced from the practical realities of, okay, I have to figure out how to produce quality wine, right? You've reached that benchmark, and now you're experimenting beyond the necessity of doing
and the benefits of relationship are also, it's not just simply that you know customers and or things along those lines. Relationships are how resources flow, right? So if you have strong relationships with people, that's you're going to be sharing knowledge, you're going to be sharing financial capital, you're going to be sharing a whole bunch of other things, greater access potentially.
Brilliant. So a little gift from Covey.
So just so I understand, so would you say that, for example, the projection of passion or the recruitment of people who have passion, is it perhaps more important in a younger, more fledgling, growing wine region than it would be, for example, in an established, successful wine region where perhaps the generation of more wealth is going to attract people with a more pragmatic interest and professional skill set?
In Niagara, you've now developed a worker base and people that move all over wineries with different types of passion. My own sort of sense of it is that it's both a resource, because you have people with passion for work, and it's important to hire people probably with the passion for work that you're looking for. So if they really like marketing and have a passion for marketing, and that's what you sort of need, then that's your focus. The other dimension of this is passion is also a resource. Passion is also something that you can train. So you got to give them, when you have employees inside your organization, you have to give them something to be passionate about. It's this notion of being like, if you treat your workers right, you pay them and you cultivate it, and maybe you incentivize it, that the work itself, that they can become passionate. But that's, this is hard to do when you have limited resources, as a lot of wineries do. Go ahead.
No, this is just me talking out loud. I guess when you're talking about, let's say, an example of a winery who has a lot of money, there's not really, let's say, a story with the owner. They have a lot of money, they build it. I think that's an example of someone who has, you said it wasn't financial resources, but to me, those are all, they could have all the resources in the world, the best winemakers, the best vineyards, and so on. They're not necessarily the most successful because often they don't have the story, right? So whether it's the right winemaker who is the story that they're promoting, or the owner did something that was interesting. That's what you see commonly, those are where the gaps are. So to me, a person at a winery who's passionate has to attach themselves, that passion needs to be sparked for them about what they're selling or what they're talking about, right? Yeah. So if there's nothing there to latch onto, it does become marketing and sales, right? So I guess that's where I see you can have all the resources in the world, so that's where you have to have something to build that passion around. And
just along those lines, something we're back to I think I agree with that in the fact that glory rituals in our original prior one were effective for certain people with Ontario identities because it gave them pride. Mm-hmm. But it was by far the one that also led to negative reactions.
The
glory alone of the opulence of showing off like the high quality machines that you have. It turned people off frequently, and
it's kind of colder, less in a way that ritual sort of kind of sets up almost like a barrier between the winery and the audience. It's like, we are up here and interact with us. So it's kind of, when we thought about it, in a way it kind of made sense, and when we sort of when people explain it to us, why. So whereas the Provenance kind of gives a sense of a personality to the winery, and kind of makes it a human connection, and so that's hedonic ritual, which kind of creates this, again, human connection and fun and enjoyment that people want to partake in. So they are they're evoking very different emotions, which is what we found in the study. We I'm glossing over that.
That's a very good insight. I mean, training your staff internally to feel that as well.
Well, your work is specific to wineries. Based on what you've learned, can you project any approach that the industry might take in terms of creating that emotional connection with the consumer?
Well, I think what seems to be, and this is the wineries that have done particularly effective job, right, are the ones where they sort of where the connections between the audiences and wineries was particularly authentic, was where the wineries leveraged sort of their genuine history and stories and sort of their actual personality. So as opposed to sort of trying to kind of manufacture it, right? So I think the implication at the industry level is probably to help wineries to individually take a look at themselves in the mirror and figure out what their individual personalities are and how to craft the rituals to communicate that, right?
With authenticity.
With authenticity, exactly, right? And also at a collective level, I think Provenance rituals, and this is a very important thing, is that Ontario actually, I think, it doesn't really talk so much about the history of Ontario winemaking, right? I mean, I've talked with some folks in the industry, right? So like basically, the industry nowadays likes to talk about the fact that it's a young industry because it's been founded in 1974, as opposed to industry that actually goes back to to mid 1800s, right? And so maybe at this point in time, sort of embracing this history and kind of talking about these transitions and trials and tribulations that have led to it. So and kind of to kind of recover some of this history now that it doesn't have to be embarrassed of it or be afraid that that the wines will somehow not live up to international standards and benchmarks.
Well, the other thing I would say is that from an industry perspective, it's this notion of evangelism and evangelist, which is we're going after consumers and overall, but ultimately the role that the Ontario Wine Society, I mean the spread of that is incredible.
Question: when you dig through the data, do you see the presence of I like your word, Maxim, manufactured. Do you see the presence of manufacture of fake passion?
Yeah, well, absolutely.
And how do you capture it in your model?
For me?
Yeah.
I do it as an inauthentic expression of it. So you can say if people express passion in the same way more than once, it was out.
Like Rubio.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, for me, what I take away from this is a lot of what Maxim just said, and this notion of what these evangelists have done. And what they continue to do. Ontario wine societies have hosted, individuals, and thousands of people have attended these things, these events over and over and over again. And what they do is they go out and they recreate these rituals. And one of the things that's shocking is that you have lineages. We were able to create lineages of people who had an experience, say with Eric, who then went out and had another experience with that evangelist who brought them back to the winery to sort of show them. I've done that. I didn't know I did it, but I did it. I had a fantastic experience at Malabar, and I brought my sister there. And my sister ordered me the Malabar monthly wine special thing. These authentic sort of relationships, these sort of inspiring moments, have a big impact. They're creating nodes within your industry that they have that create free marketing. So they're not having to spend resources on it. It's something that these individuals advocate for and spread without any action on their own.
Yeah, so basically, yeah, I think that just to reinforce the last point to reinforce, just basically industry needs to figure out, okay, so because we keep talking about consumers, and that's not that consumers are not important, right? But we keep talking about almost exclusively how do we reach the consumers and more consumers, right? What we're not talking enough about is how do we create evangelists? Who are some of the potential, people who would not just go out and buy a bottle of wine, which is not going to sustain the industry. What's important is how do you create people who just can't stop. How they're going to keep on talking to others and to their friends and their families and use whatever blogs they have in social media, whatever else to advocate on behalf of the industry.
Thank you very much, boys. Thank you. I'd like to just remind you that next week we'll be taking a break from the lecture series. We have Reading Week here at Brock University. Our next lecture will be on the 24th of February with the esteemed COVI Fellow Ronald Jackson. He's speaking about oak characteristics relative to barrel production. He's the author of the wonderful wine science book. So we're all looking forward to that on the 24th. So thank you very much.